down, but as I was getting ready today, it's not about whether I feel good or not. It's what God wants to talk to us about. And we're changing focus a little bit. I mentioned last week, actually when we started this series about out of the overflow. And it's out of the overflow of God. We've been studying all year long that we need more of God. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter how long we've loved God and served God and worked with God, that we always need more of him. But the truth is, God is immeasurable. And if we get more of God, there should be a lot of him flowing out of us. That's the way life with God is designed. And so as we go through life, if people hear us, then we're not overflowing in our speech. If people notice our actions and our attitude, then we're not living out of the overflow. And it should be a really natural thing because we don't have to work at this. We just have to draw close to God. And as he fills us, it'll automatically overflow and impact lives. And we started this study by looking at Elijah, considered one of the greatest prophets of all time, a very imperfect man. But the great thing about him is he kept listening to God. And so whenever he got down in the dumps, and if you remember, he got to the point where he just wanted to die. He was suicidal in his prayers. I don't know if you've ever gotten so bad that God, just end it all. I don't want to go on. That's where he was at. And God said, get over yourself. Get back to me. Listen to what I have to say. And here's the mission I have for you. And he did that approximately 3 years into his time of serving God as a prophet. So if you look at his history, he was only 1/3 of the way through his ministry time. If he had ended it there, he would have missed out on 2/3 of what God had for him to do. And God woke him up, got him back on track, and sent him back to ministry. And the other person we're going to look at starting today is Moses. Now, we're not going to look at the beginning of Moses' life. Moses' life was an incredible life. It says that when he was born, it was noted that he was no ordinary baby. And he was born at a time where the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. In fact, he was born at a time when every baby boy that was born was supposed to be killed. They were supposed to be taken and thrown in the Nile River because there were too many Israelites being born. And Egypt was getting kind of nervous. They're getting so populous that they could take over. And so they were really nervous, so they were trying to kill all the baby boys, and yet God protected Moses. And Moses grew up, and God put a dream in his heart that wouldn't go away. He tried to fulfill the dream his way and in his power, and he made a huge mistake at that. So at the age of 40, he ran for his life because he had committed murder, and people were out to get him. And so he ran for his life, and he ended up on the backside of the desert taking care of sheep. And we're not going to look at his whole life. We're going to look at how God restored the dream, because God's dreams for us never go away. I want you to think about that, because a lot of times we get this dream, and if it's a God-given dream, it never fades, it never goes away. We might get really distracted. Moses got really distracted. He tried to do it his way. He ran for his life. He was quote unquote a coward, hiding on the backside of the mountain, on the backside of the desert. But God's dream for him didn't fade. 40 years later, when he was 80, God showed back up and said, you know what? It's time for you to start living out the dream I have for you. Because God's dream never went away. And I want you to think about that, because we're looking at living our life out of the overflow. And one of the things we have to make sure we do is we are living the pursuit of God's dream each and every day. Now, there's a huge distinction between our dream and God's dream, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But as I share an opening story, I want to encourage you to turn to Numbers chapter 20. Numbers chapter 20 is where we pick up in the life of Moses, and it's well into the story of Moses and what was going on here. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So it's the fourth book in the Bible. Numbers chapter 20 is where we're going to be starting. And so I want you to be able to turn there. But I want to tell you the story of a man named Monty. When we find his story, he's actually in his teens. He was the son of an itinerant horse trainer, which, if you don't know anything about that, they travel from farm to farm, ranch to ranch, training horses for the different farmers. And once the horses were trained in one, he'd move to the next one, which meant Monty didn't have a very stable life. He didn't have a very stable upbringing. He didn't have a very stable education, because every year or so he was moving to a different school, a different location. And so he was always on the move. Well, when he got to be a senior, he ended up in a school, and the teacher for the senior project said, I want you to write a story. More of an article than a story, because what I want you to do is I want you to write the dream, the biggest dream you have for your life. And Monty latched onto this because he had seen a lot, he had been a lot of places, but he had this dream in the back of his head. And so he went home, and instead of just writing a paper like most of the other students that had one piece of paper written out, he ended up with about 10 pieces of paper, single-spaced, tiny writing, and then he had illustrations. He had graphed out different things. He had plotted out what he wanted to do. He even had designs for the house that he wanted to build. And his dream was to own his very own horse ranch. He wanted 200 acres. And in the center of those 200 acres, he wanted a 4,000 square foot house. And he wanted the stables and the barns to go around it. And he had it all mapped out. It was beautifully done. And he turned it in. He goes, this is my dream. And he put his heart and his soul into this dream. And he turned it in. Well, right near the end of the school year, because it was the senior project right at the end of school, right at the end of the school year, he got his paper back and he was looking forward to it. And as it was placed down on the desk in front of him, it had a big red F across the top of it. And his teacher said as she handed it to him, you need to talk to me after class. Okay. And he was confused because he had put detail. He had put his heart, his soul into this paper. It was his dream. How can the teacher give you an F on your own dream when you put effort into explaining it? It didn't make any sense. Well, after the other kids went, he went up to the teacher and go, what's going on? I wrote it out right. There's no spelling mistakes. I put in all the detail. In fact, I put in way more detail than you asked for. Why did it get an F? And she looked at him and goes, it's unrealistic. I want to pause right there. This is a real story. But are dreams supposed to be realistic? Now just think about it. If a dream is a dream, is it something that is realistic, that falls within things that you can figure out and do right now, regardless of your age? Here's a hint. If it's a God-given dream, you'll never be able to do it on your own. It will never be quote-unquote realistic because God's dreams always need his help to be accomplished. This wasn't a God-given dream. This was just a kid having a dream. And she went on to explain, it's just totally unrealistic. You have nothing. Your family has nothing. You don't even have the stability of a home that you've grown up in. This is completely unrealistic. Do you know how much money it costs to buy 200 acres? And then you want to build a 4,000 square foot house? There's no way you can do it. She goes, here, when you go home and you rewrite this paper before the school's out and you make it a realistic dream, I'll change the grade. Well, he went home and he was frustrated. He was mad. He goes, I put my heart and soul. This is my dream. And she says, I can't have a dream? Can't have my dream? And after being frustrated for a couple of days, he finally went to his dad. And his dad read through the paper. He was amazed at the detail and the desire of his son. And his son said, Dad, what do I do? And he goes, be very careful what you do, because it will have greater impact than you think. But you need to do what is right for you. Now that can be taken the wrong way in our culture, but he looked at this and goes, she can't dictate my dreams. So he walked back in the last day of school and he looked at her and he goes, I'll keep my F and I'll keep my dreams. Thank you very much. We'll fast forward about 30 years and Monty is hosting an open house on his ranch. It's a 200-acre ranch with a 4,000 square foot house in the middle. And what he's hosting is kids from a local school. And guess who the teacher who's bringing the kids is? The very same teacher who gave him the F. And as they come into his great family room, they notice above his fireplace, framed, is his dream with a big red F on the front of it. He kept his dream. His teacher came up and said, thank you for not giving up. I've been stealing kids' dreams my entire life until I ran into you. And you wouldn't let me steal your dream. And now you're an example to all my students. We need to discover a dream that we will not let anyone steal. And I don't want you to dream whatever dream you can dream. What's your biggest dream? It doesn't matter what your dream is, because God's dream is way beyond what you could ever hope or imagine. I want you to ask God, God, give me your dream for my life, and then let me hold on to it. Let me live in pursuit of that dream, and let nothing steal it. The best dreams we can have aren't our dreams. The best dreams we can have is God's dream for our life. And that's what Moses was living. He had this God-given dream, this call on his life, a divine purpose. And God says we all have that divine purpose. It says in the scriptures that before we were formed in our mother's womb, he had a purpose, a good work for each and every one of us to do. That's the God-given dream for our life. Most people never discover it, so they never live it out, and they wonder, what's the point of going on? The point of going on is discovering why God created you to begin with, and start living according to his plan, and don't let anyone steal that from you. And we see some great helps on how to pursue that dream, to be living in pursuit of that God-given dream, and how to protect it when people come against that dream. So let's read, starting in Numbers chapter 20. We're going to start in verse 1. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin and stayed near Kadesh, where Miriam died and was buried. Now, if you don't know who Miriam is Moses' sister. She's been one of the key leaders since Moses went back to Egypt and God let the people of Israel out. There was Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. They're all related. They're siblings. But they were called by God. Aaron was called by God to come alongside Moses, and Miriam came alongside. They had their disagreements. If you want to read it, read Exodus and Numbers up to this point. You'll see that they disagreed. They didn't get along because they're siblings. That happens. But they kept coming back to what God had called them to do. But now they come to this place, and it says that she died. Talk about a dream killer. The death of your loved one can be a huge dream killer. But it doesn't mean your dreams go away. Let's pick up and continue to read. It says, now there was no water in the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this desert, and we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no rain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates. There is no water for us to drink. Now, I'm going to pause right there before we finish reading it, because I want you to understand what's going on. And the challenge that Moses is facing, he's lost one of the closest people to him. Someone that God gave him as a helper in fulfilling the dream. And the dream was to lead the people of Israel out of captivity and into the promised land. What we don't know, because we haven't been doing a study on Moses' life, is this is 38 years after they left Egypt. For 38 years, Moses has been pursuing the dream. For 38 years, the people of Israel have been complaining. Think about it, 38 years later, and the people are going, why did you bring us out of Egypt? We should have died. We would have been happier if we just died back there. How stupid can you be? But they were being really stupid, and they're complaining, there's nothing here. The God who's been providing for them, they had the same clothes that they walked out of Egypt with, and nothing is worn out. They're still wearing, God's been providing food for them everywhere they go. God's been providing water for them. He's done it in the middle of a desert when he told Moses to speak to the rock, and Moses spoke to the rock, and the rock gushed water. And it's not just this little trickle. Sometimes we get this little kid Sunday school picture that they're all standing around a rock, and this little water starts spurting out like a drinking fountain. They're feeding 2 million plus people and their animals. It wasn't a little trickle. It was a gushing river that came out of a rock in the middle of the desert. And so they have this history of God providing, but they get to this place, and on the heels of Miriam dying, they come with complaints. They're rebelling. They're getting mad at Moses and Aaron. Wait a second. These are the guys who've been leading you, and you've been watching miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle of God's provision, because God's dream is for you to enter the promised land. The only reason you didn't do it 30-some years ago is because you didn't trust God. You looked at circumstances and walked away from God. So now you have to go through this until you have enough faith to obey God and trust Him and walk into the promised land. But they're stuck in this situation. And I want you to think about this as we look at the first point, and that is, we have to understand that we have to hold fast to God's dreams for us, because distractions will come. I say distractions, and in this case, disaster, heartbreak. There's lots of things that could have gotten them off track. But Moses and Aaron held on to the vision that God had given them, the dream that God had given them. I'm not going to let the dream die, because it's not my dream, it's God's. There's a song that came out, I believe it was in the early 90s. And the chorus goes something like this: the dream never dies, only the dreamer. The song never stops, only the singer. And that's sort of accurate. God's dream never dies. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we can start living out God's given dream for us. But we have to hold fast. We have to protect it. We have to pursue it. Israel had forfeited the original timeline and dream. And did you know you can do that? God has a dream for each of us, and we can make dumb decisions that put it on hold. They chose not to walk in faith, and so for 40 years they had to wander in the wilderness to learn what faith was, to learn what obedience was. Because God wanted to develop their character, so they had the faith to be able to live out the God-given dream that He had given them 40 years earlier. We can make choices where we're not living by faith, and we postpone God's given dream for our lives. It doesn't mean the dream goes away. It just means we have to go through some stuff until our character is developed to the point where we can now accept the dream that God has for us. We can make some really dumb mistakes. Or let's be honest, just dumb choices. They're not mistakes. They're choices we made. We intentionally did it, knowing that it wasn't what God wanted us to do, but we did it anyway. That doesn't mean God's dream for our life goes away. It just means it's postponed until our character is developed. God doesn't forget His promises. I want you to think about it. God doesn't forget His promise. He's just waiting for someone to believe Him for those promises. Do you believe God for the promises that we find in Scripture? Do you believe God for the promises that He's put in your heart for your own life, for your family? Or do you let circumstances get in the way? Do you let the busyness and the routine of life push out those promises? Because God hasn't forgotten them. And God's call for you to live according to them hasn't gone away. You've just gotten distracted. And we need to stay focused. We need to stay intentional. And we need to do it with the people around us. Holding fast is simply a series of choices we do, sometimes every day, sometimes multiple times each day. If there's a call on your life, you need to make the choice every time a distraction comes up to say, I'm going to stay the course. I'm going to refocus on God and what His dream is for me. I'm going to do what He wants me to do. It doesn't matter how bad the thing is around me, I'm going to stay focused. I'm going to keep pursuing that dream because that's what needs to happen, and it's a choice that you have to make over and 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 over again. It's not a once and done. It's a continual process of saying, God, I trust You. I trust You every moment of every day. But we need to understand that one foolish choice to intentionally distract ourselves from the God-given dream can wipe out years of faithfully serving God. And we have to start over again. Or we have to adjust to the choices we made in life not going the way we had hoped. If you read Moses' story, and we could go on to read, let's pick up in verse 6. It says, Moses and Aaron went from the assembly, and they entered the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. And you will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff of the Lord, took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with the staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give you. These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and where he showed himself holy among them. Now I want you to catch the last part. God said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not do what glorified me. And if you look at Moses' words, he goes, must we, speaking of him and Aaron, bring water from this rock? And then he doesn't do what God says. He's really close to it. But instead of speaking to the rock like he did the first time, he decides to hit the rock with the staff. God still honors and provides, but there's a consequence. Because now Moses and Aaron aren't going to enter the promised land with the people of Israel. They'll only be able to take the people of Israel up to the edge of the promised land. There's always consequences for our choices to not obey. And you know what highlights the right choices? What helps us know that we're on the right track to defending the God-given dream that he has for us? The right choices are seen as we deal with difficult circumstances. It's not as we deal with the easy things, because anyone can deal good with easy things. Oh, God bless me, and I got this unexpected inheritance, and I can get out of debt, and I can help family and friends. Yeah, I can do that. That's easy. Yeah, that is easy. But when someone steals your ID and drains your bank account and you have nothing, and you're wondering how you're going to get food for the next day, are you still going to hold on to that dream and make the right choices? Well, if I find them, I'm going to sue them, and I'm going to get all the money back plus some. Okay, is that God, or is that you wanting revenge? We need to learn to honor God, especially in the tough times. Those right choices are highlighted when we do exactly that. Difficulties can cause discouragement or determination. What are you going to let it do in your life? Are you going to let the difficult things discourage you and you walk away from God and his dreams and his plans like Israel did for 40 years? A whole generation had to die off because they didn't have faith in God. And then that next generation had seen God's provision and his miracles, and when it came back to the promised land, okay, if God's taking care of us for the last 40 years, he can help us when we go in there. They had the faith because it had been developed through the trials and the tribulation, through the hard times, the bad choices, and seeing God's glory in the midst of it all. When you face those tough times, when you go through, quote unquote, hell itself, are you going to become determined for God or discouraged because of what's going on? There's this great story, and it's a true story about a lady who, she committed some horrendous crimes, ended up murdering a bunch of people, and ended up on death row. And she knew she belonged there. She didn't try to fight the conviction. She knew she was slated for execution because of what she did. But God still had a dream for her life. She had no idea who God was. But God didn't create her by accident. He had a dream for her life, and that dream was to impact other ladies with the hope of Jesus Christ. But she didn't know Jesus Christ until this crazy lady kept coming to death row. She was a chaplain in the prison where this lady was. And after coming for a couple months, this lady who was slated for execution chose Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior. And God says, oh, you're mine now? This is my dream for you. I want you to impact lives for eternity. I want you to change, be used by me to change the lives of people and lead other ladies to a relationship with me. And she sat there in her cell, isolated, going, how on earth can I do that? I'm on death row. I'm slated to be executed in 1.5 years because I'm not making any appeals, and it's going to take that long, but that's when I'm slated to be executed. How can I impact ladies' lives? And then she realized that they had activity time once a day where they actually got to interact with other ladies. So she started interacting, sharing about the hope of Jesus Christ. She started sharing the difference in the peace that God had given her in spite of the fact that the circumstances didn't change. But she changed because God was there, and she started living out her dream. God used her to impact so many lives that prison started changing what they called the ladies' death row. It was no longer death row, but they started because the inmates started calling it life row, because so many people found life in Jesus Christ because of her. Yes, a year and a half later, that lady was executed for her crimes, but she didn't feel bad about it because she had lived out her God-given dream. In the middle of tough circumstances, she had lived out her God-given dream. She made the choice, even though she knew she was going to be executed, I'm going to use every moment I can to share the hope of Jesus Christ with anyone I can. And it impacted an entire prison system because of it. Are we willing to make those difficult choices and stay focused on the God-given dream? The second point we see today is we need to defend against the dream stealers. They're there, and they're actively trying to destroy you and distract you from fulfilling the God-given dream you have. In this case, it was the people of Israel. There wasn't one dream stealer. It was 2 million plus noisy people complaining at Moses, and it had been going on for 38 years. In fact, at one point, they became so successful that Aaron and Miriam had turned against Moses, saying that he shouldn't be the leader anymore, they should be the leader. And then where it says, we read that we should have died with our brothers in the desert, what they're referring to is when Miriam and Aaron tried to lead this rebellion against Moses, and the earth opened up and swallowed all the rebels. And everyone said, okay, Moses is God's leader, we're not going to complain anymore. And Miriam and Aaron said, yeah, Moses is God's leader, we're going to follow him. Because when the ground opens up and eats you because you're rebelling, you pay attention. But I want you to think about it. For 38 years, some of us aren't 38 years old. That means for more than your entire life, Moses had been dealing with people trying to steal the dream. As soon as they walked out of Egypt, and they walked out of Egypt, the Bible tells us, looting Egypt, because the Egyptian says, take anything and everything you want. Take our gold, take our silver, take our precious metal, take it all. We just need you out of here. So they walked out filthy rich. But as soon as they got to the first camping spot, people started complaining against Moses. From day one, people had been complaining, and 38 years later, they're still doing it. Talk about dream stealers. We find ourselves surrounded by dream stealers. Sometimes we choose to let them in our life. We choose to let them walk beside us because we don't know they're going to turn into dream stealers. I mean, Aaron was God's chosen helper for Moses. When he first called Moses and said, now's the time to fulfill your dream, Moses is going, I can't speak. I can't do this. And he goes, I'll send you a helper. I'll send you Aaron, your brother. God's chosen helper became one of his dream stealers at one point. But at this point, Aaron is on Moses' side. But the people were against them. They were surrounded by 2 million plus people who were trying to steal the dream that God had given them. Barren situations where we don't see things happening can be dream stealers. But just because we don't see anything happen doesn't mean God is not working. We need to trust God in his vision and his plan. Focus on him, not on us. Because you see, God lets us go through those barren times to solidify the dream, to make us ready for what he has next. Because he's more concerned with building our character than fulfilling our immediate desire for a dream right now. He wants you to be the best you can possibly be. And sometimes that means you need to go through the tough time a little bit longer. Because you need to be refined. You need that character built into you. And then we run into the 2 million people. The way I put it is they're the demented dream killers. Because they have this idea in their head that doesn't have any basis on reality. And yet they're spewing forth their discouragement. They're trying to tell us to turn around and go back. Think about it. They're saying, if only we had died when the earth opened up and ate all the other rebellious people. We'd rather be dead than here. Hello? Or maybe we should have never left Egypt to begin with. Oh, you mean go back to that luxury place where they were killing your newborn babies because that's the dream for your life. Don't settle for your dream and your desires. Hold on to God's. Make sure God's voice is the loudest in your ears, not the voice of the dream killers. And how did they do that? Look at what they did. It says the people rose up and they were complaining, and there's nothing here in verse 6. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly, and they entered the tent of meeting, and they complained to God for the next 3 days. It doesn't say that at all. They didn't say anything. They just sought the presence of God. It says they walked into the tent of meeting. And the tent of meetings where Moses and Aaron and Joshua, who was Moses' assistant, used to go on a very regular basis to seek God's presence. It doesn't say that they said anything. It says they went in, they fell face down in the presence of God and waited. Too often we come into God's presence and we have so much we want to say that God can't get a word in edgewise. And then we leave and we go, oh, God doesn't care what's going on. Yeah, he does. You just didn't shut up long enough to listen to him. We need to stop talking. We need to be quiet and start listening. And that's how we make sure God's voice is the loudest. And it's interesting because when we do this, we'll have the ability to do our final point. And that is simply this. Don't fear, but face the opposition. Now, it's interesting because the way Moses and Aaron faced the opposition is they turned away from the noise of the crowd and they went and they faced God. We're never supposed to face the opposition without God's presence and God's word behind us. We like to react. Oh, you said that? Yeah, I'm going to give you a face. You did that? I'm going to make sure you get justice. And we never bother to talk to God until afterwards, and we're like, God, I made a mess of this. Can you pick up the pieces and put it back together? The way we face opposition is we turn and face God first. It's kind of a paradox, but we need to understand that the way you face opposition, don't fear it, but face it. The paradox is turn from them to God first and foremost. I don't care what the situation is. These people were almost to the point of wanting to kill Moses and Aaron because of where they were. But they didn't worry about them. They just said, we need to draw close to God. We need to position ourselves in a way that we can hear God and respond to God, not be distracted by the noise of the people. Are we willing to do that, to posture ourselves properly for God's provision? So often we miss the provision that God has right on hand because we're not postured properly to receive it. Moses and Aaron could have gone in, and I'm sure they could have talked for hours and days about the stupid people out there for 38 years. They've had the same complaints over and over and over again. When are they going to learn? When are they going to trust you? They could have gone on for weeks probably because it was 38 years of built up. But instead of all that, they said, okay, if we want to know what God wants us to do, we need to just be quiet in the presence of God. Because when we walk into his presence, it's not about us at all. It's about him. And we need to rediscover that truth for our lives. God has invited us over and over and over again to cross the threshold into his presence, and we come with our agenda, and we come with our plans, and we spew and talk, and we never shut up, and then we walk out going, well, nothing's changed. Yeah, because you didn't listen. You need to learn to listen. I need to learn to listen. We all need to learn to listen. And I love the posture they take because it wasn't a posture of, okay, God, here I am. Yep, got to keep going. Hurry up, God. No, they came in and they fell on their face. That's bowing down in reverence to God. And they stayed there until God spoke and gave them an answer. They didn't ask. They didn't give their case. They didn't plead for anything. They just walked into his presence and said, God, here we are. And then they bowed down and waited for God to respond. You see, when we come in with our own agenda, we're trying to manipulate God to do what we want. I want you to think about that because trying to be a God manipulator is one of the dumbest things human beings try to do on a regular basis. Because we can't do it. We manipulate everything, so we think we can manipulate God. I mean, we manipulate temperature, so it's just the right temperature when we come into a building. We manipulate light so that we can stay up to all hours of the night and not get the sleep we need. We try to manipulate everything. And then we look at our relationship with God and we go, yeah, I can manipulate God. I'll come in with my request and he's promised to do it if I claim it in Jesus' name. No, he hasn't. That's a scripture that's really misapplied because it's not taken in context. That's a different sermon, different topic to discuss, but we need to learn to posture ourselves in a way where we can hear God. And when we hear God, we can turn around and face our situations with God's glory. And that's what we need to understand. We have to learn how to do this. Face it with God's glory alone. Not with your wisdom, not with your passion, not with your anger, not with your frustration. Face the opposition with God's glory alone, because guess what? Nothing can stand against the glory of God. Nothing. Man's wisdom crumbles. Man's might crumbles. Everything crumbles against the glory of God. So if you want to see victory, if you want to see things turn around, if you want to see your family set free and discover what God has for them, if you want to see people rediscover God's initial plan and dream for their life, face those situations with the glory of God, which means you have to be in God's presence long enough to get the glory of God. So here's a question for you. Moses and Aaron went to the tent of meeting because it was a regular place of encountering the presence of God. It says that when they approached the tent, the people of Israel would turn and face the tent. They'd all come out of their own tents. Now I want you to think about 2 million plus people would see Moses and Aaron or Moses and Joshua heading to the tent of meeting. And they would all stand and look at them. And when they entered into the tent of meeting, when they crossed that threshold into the presence of God, it says that the people would stop whatever they were doing and they would worship God until Moses and whoever was with them came out of the tent of meeting. Because their willingness to encounter the presence of God and the glory of God impacted the entire community. We've forgotten that simple truth. If we will just take time to encounter the glory of God on a personal basis, it will impact our families, it will impact our workplaces, it will impact our community, and people will turn in amazement that what on earth is going on? Oh, that's just Albert. He's encountering God's glory. But he's just sitting in his car. Yeah, that's his tent of meeting. He does that before he goes on a job site, before he goes to jail, before he does this or that. He just sits in his car and he encounters God. That's weird. Yeah, but watch what happens. God does amazing things. See, your tent of meeting might be your car. But I want to ask you guys, where is your tent of meeting? Where is the place where you cross over the threshold from your concerns and you just enter into the presence of God and listen to God? We all need a regular place where we do that. Some of us go through life and we go, I wish I just could see the power of God in my life and my family. Well, are you spending time in the presence of God? Are you seeing the glory of God where you walk out and people know that you've been in the presence of God? This isn't just an Old Testament story thing. It says that the apostles who had spent time with Jesus, when they were falsely imprisoned and brought before the legal people of the day, the high priest and everything, they heard what the disciples said. They noted that they were uneducated people, but they had spent time with Jesus. The education doesn't matter. The spending time in the presence of God is all that you need. Do people know that you spend time with Jesus? Or are they shocked when you say anything positive about God? You believe in God? I would have never guessed. Okay, then you're not spending time in the right place. When their jaw hits the floor and they look around confused like they're talking to an alien because you start talking about the hope that you have in Jesus Christ and that he can change life, if that's people's reaction, then you're not spending enough time in the presence of God. Because it isn't about our eloquence of what we say. It's about the fact that we can carry the glory of God with us, and that is what we're supposed to bring when we encounter people and face people. Even in our perfection, even in our imperfection, because Moses and Aaron left there. They had God's command, they left there, and they didn't follow it right. But that didn't diminish the glory of God. They walked out there and they, okay, guys, you asked for it, we're going to give it to you. You're stubborn people, and if we have to do this, we're going to do this. But God still got the glory because they carried the glory of God with them. We need to learn to wait long enough in the presence of God where we carry the glory of God. God's presence with us is all we ever need. Let me say that again because some of us go, well, I look at my background. I don't have a great background. You don't need a great background. I don't have an education. You don't need an education. What you need is the presence of God, period. That will change everything. You don't have to say a word. If you're carrying the presence of God into a situation, people will notice that something is different just because you are there. We need to learn to be people of the presence once again. Where you hang out with God long enough that you are reflecting his character and the way he does things. You're carrying his glory wherever you go. My life is a really odd example of hanging out with someone long enough to carry their presence. Now, if you fast forward to today, I have much more grace and sympathy for people because I've hung out with my wife. Because she is grace epitified, not pitified, that's not the right word. She's the epitome of grace overflowing to the point of sometimes being really stupid. I love my wife. But she has softened my black and white justice, this is what the Bible says, shape up or ship out, attitude. I needed that balance in my life. So that's the modern day example. The old example is when I came back from the mission field. I had no exposure to modern culture, modern American culture, except the one TV show we got when we were in Africa. There's only TV for 3 hours. It was black and white. And 2 hours, 1 hour was political stuff and news. 1 hour was local entertainment. And 1 hour was an imported show from the United States that I wasn't supposed to watch. When my parents disappeared, we all watched that one show. That one show was The Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno. Okay. So that was my exposure to American entertainment. And then I came back to the States, and I went, wow, there's a whole lot more on TV than I ever realized. But by that point, I didn't want to sit inside. I wanted to go outside and play. And music, wow, humbug to music. I just want to go outside and play. I was very much an outdoors kid. And then we moved across the country because my dad got a job teaching at a Bible school. So we moved from Pennsylvania to Washington State. And I thought, here we go again, because I'd gone to a lot of schools over the years, moved a lot. And I said, okay, what? It was a new adventure. What can I discover here? And my first impression of Washington State was from a person who lived in Seattle and had moved to Pennsylvania. And her shirt said, in Seattle Rust, we don't tan. Didn't make any sense to me until I moved over here. But I also had this impression that Washington State, the lumberjacks. And then we drove from Pennsylvania here, and when you hit Spokane, the trees disappear. We're in Washington, and it's a desert. And I'm like, all the things I saw and read are lies. There's no trees around here. And then we hit the Cascades. Okay, the trees came back. Well, I got settled in school, and my best friend happened to live about a block and a half from my house. And he had lived in the same place his entire life. And he decided to educate me about American ways. Okay, cool. You can educate me. He goes, first thing you need to understand is what good music is. Like, what's good music? He goes, country music's good music. Now, I'm not talking about new country, which isn't really country. I'm talking about old country. The good stuff. You know, my wife ran away, stole my truck, ran over my dog in the process, and now here I am crying. Okay, those kind of good old songs. I'd never heard country music before in my life. I'd never had coffee before in my life. Because I was raised in Africa in an ex-British colony, and they don't drink coffee, they drink tea, or their version of tea. My son has genetically picked up his way of making tea from me, because he puts half a cup of sugar in, then he puts a quarter cup of tea in, and then he puts a quarter cup of milk in to make a full cup of tea. That's the kind of tea I grew up drinking, nasty sweet stuff. And then my friend, whose dad happened to own 3 coffee shops, said, you need to learn what coffee is. Okay. It's a bitter drink. He goes, no, you have to understand it. And he could tell how long a pot of just regular drip coffee had been sitting just by the smell of it. I said, no, you can't. So we went to a couple coffee shops, and he would, okay, it's been about this long, and he'd ask the server, like, yeah, how did you know? I can tell by the smell. And so he started introducing me to coffee. He goes, we need to go to the best coffee shop in Seattle. I go, what's that? And you have to go back years because it's been sold since then, but for about 40 years, the same person owned the same little coffee shop. It was called the B&O Espresso. B&O after the railroad in Monopoly. Owned by a wonderful gentleman. He was a French-trained pastry chef, and he did great coffee. And the first time we went there, they're ordering different coffee, and I have no idea what coffee is. I have no idea how to order it. And my friend goes, oh, let me order for you. And he ordered a straight shot of espresso. I said, just one? That's a little one. Why don't you give me more than that? So I got a triple shot of espresso. Nothing else, just a triple shot of espresso. And they were all waiting in anticipation of my reaction. I drank it all without making much of a reaction and earned their respect. No, I started learning about coffee. Before I hung out with my friend, I didn't know country music and I didn't know coffee. Within 5 years, I could identify how long something had been sitting on the warmer by the smell of it. Because his characteristics and his preferences rubbed off on me. Now, why do I bring that up? If we stay in the presence of God long enough, guess what's going to naturally happen? God's character and his desires and his dreams are going to rub off on us. His glory is going to rub off on us, and we're going to be able to walk into life carrying the presence and the glory of God wherever we go. It's not something we manufacture. It's not something we do. It just happens by spending time in the presence of God. If you want another more practical example, when the weather changes and people start doing more camping or hanging out outside and they decide to have a fire, you can tell the people who've been out by campfire as soon as they walk into a room. Because they bring the smell of the campfire into the building, and you can't hide it. Everyone knows it. That's the way it should be with the presence of God. That we crossed over that threshold into his presence. We stayed there long enough that we were saturated with his presence. And we crossed back out into the world and we take the presence with us. Do people know the glory of God just because we walk around our community? They should. They should. And that keeps us focused in the right place. It keeps us pursuing the dream that God has for us. Working hard for God is not the same as walking with God. I want you to think about that because that's one of the greatest struggles most pastors face. Well, I know how to work hard for God. I need to just keep working hard for God. No, you don't. You need to stop doing and start being in his presence. Are we willing to wait and be in his presence? Our intimacy with God makes all the difference. Period. Any situation, any relationship, our intimacy with God will make all the difference. Are we willing to pursue God's dream by pursuing God? We want the benefits of his dream and his plans for our life, but we forget it's his dream and his plan. We just get to fit into it. Are we willing to pursue that intimacy, that relationship, because it will make all the difference. And you will start to see God's dream for your life fulfilled. You have to let go of your dream. You have to not get distracted and let the dream killers sneak in. And you have to focus on God and being in his presence until you carry his glory with you, because that glory will push aside any distraction and help you live out the dream that God has for you. So where do you find yourself today? You find yourself sitting here going, I used to have a dream from God, but I have to admit, Pastor, I've let the dream killers come in. I've let them push aside what God had planned for me, what God put in my heart. I've let the concerns of everyday life get in the way. I've let the grief and sorrow of watching loved ones make bad choices or even pass away prevent me from doing what God's called me to do. I want to rediscover that. Well, then God is calling you, come back into my presence. There's no magic prayer you can pray You have to spend time in the presence of God. He will rebirth within you that God-given dream. He will affirm to you what you're supposed to do based on his character and who he is and his glory in your life. I don't know if I can show God's glory. I'm pretty messed up, Pastor Rob. Read the Bible. It's full of messed up people who just said yes to God, and his glory shone brightly through each and every one of them. Think about it, Moses. He's a coward. He's a murderer. He claims he can't speak well, but after God sends him a spokesman, you never hear Aaron speaking. He does all the speaking himself. He could speak fine. So he's a self-deceived liar. But God says, if you trust me, I can work through you. In spite of all of that, I can work through you. And God did. What does God want to do in your life? It all comes back to surrender, spending time in his presence, and letting his glory lead you as you live out his dream for your life. Do you need to rediscover God's dream? Do you need to start living out that dream by his power and his glory alone? If that's you today, in a moment, I'm going to pray for you. But I want you to do an act of surrender. And we do it all the time in church, but we forget it's an act of surrender. That is the raising of our hands. The raising of our hands is an act of surrender. We